So far, the Cossacks following our rear guard gave very little trouble. The state of the cavalry and the speed of our march prevented us from sending out scouting parties. Hence, we had no news of the enemy. However, as there were no Cossacks alongside our route, the raiding parties from the head of the column went out and returned, seeing only a few peasants who fled at our approach. This easy foraging had one great disadvantage, in that the sense of security thus created increased the number of stragglers. Since there was no food without raids, everyone wanted to raid. The raiders and stranglers of the rear guard were not so fortunate. The enemy captured a good number of them every day. Satisfied, no doubt, with this accomplishment, they seldom ventured within range of our muskets. On the 30th, we made Velikzevo our headquarters for the night. This fine manor, however, had not a single rafter left, and we had difficulty in collecting enough material from the wreckage to patch up one room for the emperor and one for the chief of staff. The billiard table was the only piece of furniture still intact. Here we received the delayed dispatches. On the following day, the 31st, the headquarters and the guard were stationed at Vyazma, where we stayed through the 1st of November. The emperor did not even make a guess at Kutuzov's march, and Kutuzov left us very quiet. The weather was fine. The emperor repeated more than once that the Russian autumn was like the autumns at Fontainebleau, and judging what the weather would be like in 10 days or a fortnight's time by what it was on that particular day. He said to the Prince of Neuchâtel that this was just the weather one had at Fontainebleau around St. Hubert's Day, and that the stories people told about the Russian winter would only scare children. On the 2nd, we halted at Samlovo. On the 3rd, at Slavokovo, where we had the first snow. It was the general opinion that the security of our flanks during the preceding few days, the enemy having barely kept up with our rear guard, was only a ruse to foster confidence and to bring about, somewhere near Borodino, another skirmish on the lines of Voronovo. But Kutuzov's weak pursuit was actually due, afterwards discovered, to his uncertainty regarding our movements. He did not know definitely until the 27th that our march against him had been only the prelude to a retreat. On the 28th, he directed Milioradovich, to whom he attached a strong body of infantry and cavalry, to attack us and cut off our rearward divisions before we reached Vyazma. The emperor learned of this attack on the 3rd at Slavkovo. He learned that the viceroy, Prince Poniatowski, and Elchingen had to support Ekmul, who commanded the rear guard, and whose progress was slowed up and hindered by the large number of stragglers whom hunger and sickness already had separated from their units. He was still a good distance from Vyazma when the Russian infantry appeared. Not having a strong force, the marshal had to hasten his march. Meanwhile, Marshal Ney was encamped before Vyazma. The viceroy and Prince Poniatowski had known since the previous day that the enemy was closing in on the Prince of Ekmul and had consequently slackened their advance. They also took up their position before Vyazma in order to await him. The Cossacks swarmed over the countryside and constantly cut off communications between our corps, however close they were to each other. The fight went to our advantage once we were in battle order. But it was unfortunate that the emperor, not expecting this renewed activity on the part of Kutuzov and thinking that the Russian general would try to get ahead of us rather than harass us, was at Slavkovo on that day and the guard with him. As nobody held supreme command, there was no unity in the dispositions made. Our men fought bravely for 6 hours, but solely on the defensive. The enemy were thus made to pay dearly for their daring attempt and lost a great number of men, and for this they achieved nothing except that they inflicted severe damage on the First Corps, in which some disorder was shown when it passed ahead of the Viceroy's army. This disorder was still greater at the crossing of the bridge over the Vyazma. Until then, as long, that is, as it had to withstand alone the attacks of the enemy, the First Corps had maintained its honor and reputation, although it was fiercely attacked and its formation broken by the artillery. This momentary disorder was conspicuous because it was the first time that these gallant infantry broke their ranks and compelled their dogged commander to give ground. I have related these painful details because from this incident must be dated our disorganization and misfortunes. The First Corps, which on taking the field was the largest and finest, a rival to the Guard, was thenceforward the hardest hit, and the evil spread. Poniatowski, the viceroy, and Ney all fought as in the days of our success. The emperor had to give the command of the rear guard to Marshal Ney, whose energy and courage increased with his dangers and difficulties. The emperor busied himself drawing up a body of instructions on the manner in which the retreat should be conducted. This, he thought, would put right all the troubles of which we complained arising from the attacks of the Cossacks. He likened them to the Arabs and directed that we should march as in Egypt, with the baggage in the center, a half battalion at the front and the rear, and battalions in file on the flanks. In this way, we should be able to direct our fire, in case of need, on all sides like a square. The units could march, he said, at a short distance from each other, with artillery between them. He talked a great deal about these dispositions, which he regarded as a sure safeguard for the army, flattering himself that he would be able to take up a position at Smolensk. The danger, however, was not in the attacks of the Cossacks, which our soldiers, when in platoons, never feared and had always repulsed when they were so minded. The danger lay in hunger, in the lack of provisions, and in the absence of any organized service of supply, which led to the disorganization of all units, an inevitable consequence of the speed of the march and the devastation over this line of country. It would have been necessary to limit the march to 3 or 4 leagues a day, measured along the route, in order to cover as much ground again in collecting food on our flanks. In this way, the soldiers would have followed the flag and would nearly all have been saved. The enemy, however, would have gained the lead or else overtaken us and attacked us from all quarters. And to obviate this danger, it was held, the other disadvantages had to be endured. The emperor, thinking that this attack by the Russians was a general movement of their whole army, decided to halt. By massing his troops near Slavkovo, he hoped to have a good opportunity of falling unexpectedly upon the enemy, who thought they were only following up a rear guard, and so of making them regret their rash pursuit. But, in consequence of the disorder of the First Corps, Ney made so discouraging a report on the events of the day before that any man but the emperor would have abandoned this idea of a surprise attack. Ney announced that he was occupying the narrow passage of a wood behind Vyazma, but that, on account of the withdrawal of the First and Fourth Corps, he would have to continue his retreating movement before the dawn in order not to risk the loss of his troops. He added that this behavior of the First Corps on the previous day had set a bad example to all the troops and had had a dangerous effect on them. This report, however, which arrived in the middle of the morning, did not change the emperor's dispositions. He still believed that all the Russian army had massed together and that a lively and sudden attack on this cumbersome body of troops would have a glorious result. He stayed at Slavkovo, hoping for a thorough revenge throughout the 4th. The enemy, however, attempted nothing. Ney's discouraging reports followed one upon another, and so did the arrival of the various corps, who threw each other into confusion. On the 5th, the emperor had to resume his march. Junot led off, followed by the Young Guard and the 2nd and 4th Cavalry, then the Old Guard, Poniatowski, Eugene, and Davout, whose corps was disintegrated. Ney conducted the rear guard with a vigor worthy of his courage and infused his own energy into all around him. On the 5th, we spent the night at Drogobuya. The dispatches continued to arrive regularly. The weather, which had been milder for 36 hours before, became suddenly colder. There was no news of the enemy. Was Kutuzov following behind, or was he ahead of us? This uncertainty added further to the emperor's difficulties and anxieties. On the 6th, headquarters were at Mikhailevska. It was a day of bad news. The emperor was first much concerned about the details he had learned of the retreat of his troops on the Dvina, which occurred just when he most needed their success. Then he was greatly perturbed by the first news he received of Malet's conspiracy. Malet, a former general who was held prisoner in a private asylum, had formed the scheme of starting a republican revolution by means of a forged decree of the Senate and an engineered rumor of the emperor's death. On the evening of October 22nd, Malet escaped, and he gained such influence over certain public officials and over the troops of the Paris garrison that he succeeded in paralyzing the government from midnight until 9 a.m. During this time, he placed the minister, Savary, Duke of Rovigo, and the prefect of police, Pasquier, under arrest, and seriously wounded General Hulin, commandant.